Welcome back to the garage. In this video, we're continuing work on Project Audi 5000, the biggest automotive mistake I've made on this channel since Project E30. In the last video, we went over all of the major issues with the car, and in this video, we're going to start taking them on. Let's start off with the most critical aspects first. I've got the parts sitting over on the bench. What we have here are two issues that I want to fix. The first of which are the parking brake cables. They are completely seized on the car. I literally can't park the car in my driveway. It's had to sit out on the street because my driveway is too sloped to simply just leave the car sitting in gear to hold it in place. Secondly is the fuel accumulator. This is what's causing, I think, the car to take a very long time to start. This is basically the equivalent of an electronic fuel injection system's fuel pressure regulator. What happens is after you turn off the engine, this maintains fuel pressure in the lines from this going to the engine. The one in the car I believe has failed, therefore all the fuel pressure drains back down to the tank, and you have to sit there and crank and crank and crank until you build up fuel pressure again in the lines. That not only is very hard on the starter motor, it's just inconvenient to use the car that way. So these two repairs should suddenly make this car usable like a normal car. So let's get started with tackling these e-brake cables. Alright, so 2 minutes into this job, we already got a whole lot of fun going on. So this is the e-brake cable right here. You can see it's starting to rust right there and it's kinked pretty bad. But as I'm looking at this, it actually looks like the cable is retracted right now. Not loose, but actually in the pulled position, even though the brake isn't tight. So that's curious. I'm pretty sure this bell crank should be swung out towards the outside of the vehicle, but right now it's pulled in as if it was locked on. So that is concern number one. Second concern is looking at the cable itself. See how it fits into this knuckle right there. And if we look at the new cables, that's the end that's supposed to fit in there, and it just looks very different. Not to mention there's a whole lot of cable that sticks out of that compared to what we see right there, even the space that could be provided right there. So I'm afraid that I have the wrong cables, even though they said that these cross-referenced for an 87 Quattro. So a bit disappointed there, but before we can even know anything further, I have to remove those cables. Alright, so I've disconnected the emergency brake cables at the actual handle in the middle of the car. And I'm going to see if I can't pull this bell crank back and get this cable looped from the hook there. That cable is not moving at all. So I did some more research and I figured out that yes, in fact, I ordered the wrong cables. Apparently the non-Quattro is a completely different cable. So I'm abandoning the e-brake repair for today just because I will have to buy the correct e-brake cables for that. I did find them out there. They kind of cost an arm and a leg, 50 bucks a side. I might try seeing if I can't find them cheaper elsewhere, but at least I know they're out there. But that is the only way to fix this. Those cables are seized from the inside. I've tried loosening them up and yep, they're going nowhere. So nothing to be done on that. Let's move on to replacing the fuel accumulator. Fingers crossed we have better luck there. Ta-da! Alright. So I don't really like what I see here. It's kind of a lot of corrosion on these. So I'm going to be very gentle. This is one of those things you start in, you kind of have to finish it. So if this isn't going to let up easily, we might have to reassess how to deal with this situation. I was able to crack that one loose, but kind of what I was afraid of. Very similar to a brake line, where the brake line gets seized to the fitting. It doesn't rotate anymore. Alright, so a week has passed because I've had to go back to the drawing board on how I'm going to install this new fuel pressure regulator. So the challenge really stems around the fact that the bespoke fittings that this fuel pressure regulator requires are completely rusted solid. There's absolutely no chance that I'm going to be able to unthread them without rupturing the lines that go into them. Now, the biggest problem with that is these parts are not available anymore. Those only came out of an Audi product catalog, and that was back in 1987. They don't exist on shelves anymore. It's not even worth going to the Audi dealership or even looking online. I know those lines don't exist. Unfortunately, this is the kind of problem you run into when dealing with a very unique car such as this Audi 5000 Quattro Turbo. The parts are getting very scarce, especially these really obscure ones such as perfectly formed and bespoke fuel lines. So what I've had to do is go out and figure out what is even going to mate up to this fuel pressure regulator. What are these thread sizes? What can I fit into these flare type couplers right there? What the end objective here is to put a barb on either end of these outlet and inlets so that I can fit up a 5/16 inch fuel injection rubber hose to it. That's really the end game. So I've basically purchased every single hardware fitting that I could find that may work for this. I literally had to spend probably $60, $70 in fittings just to try and get something that's going to work here. This kind of issue is what would send a car like this to the junkyard. You will not find a mechanic shop that wants to deal with any of this sort of thing. The only way this will ever get fixed is if you're an owner of the car that cares enough to bring it back to life. So I've gone and found the correct thread pitch of this. These are metric fittings. This is an M14, that's an M16, and they're both 1.5 pitch. So then I've had to find some sort of flare adapter that goes onto those, and those are called swivel joints, as I found out. So what I found are two swivel adapters that will fit on this, and they're made of brass. I'm just hoping that this ball cup flare type joint will press into there, and once it's tightened down, since brass is a very kind of malleable metal, it'll seal up against there so fuel doesn't leak out. What I'll be left with are two fuel nipple barb type things that I can slip hoses onto. Now the other challenge there is we've got nylon fuel lines that go into the bespoke original fittings. So I'm either going to have to cut those nylon lines off and try to fit one of these kind of adapter barbs into the nylon fitting, or I'm going to have to go further upstream and tap into the next hard line. And if I have to do that, I've purchased some sort of compression fittings that should go over the top of what measures to be about 8.25 millimeter diameter hard lines that are further upstream. These are technically 5/16, I believe, but I'm going to try and make it work. Again, this is the challenge, especially in the United States, when you're dealing with all auto parts stores and even aftermarket parts stores are basically all in standard sizing, where the car we've got here is all in metric. It's kind of a mild nightmare if you don't have the initiative to go do all the research yourself. The other issue with this is once I break those fuel lines open, once I sever those connections, the car is immobile until I figure out a solution. So that's an additional bit of stress that comes along with doing this sort of job. It's not fun. So let's get on with it and hope we come out and see the other side. Well, that's surprising. I've actually been able to loosen that one without shearing it off. So I've actually loosened that line. That is surprising. Now, whether or not I can separate the center sealing mechanism from the actual nut is the next question. Oh, yep, that's what I thought would happen. That sheared right off. It's that nylon hose bit and the metal barb on the end of it broke right off. It's just thin metal. There was just no chance that was going to free up. All right, so I've successfully removed the old accumulator from there, and look how rusted that is. That is why I was so concerned with removing these fittings. I can't believe I got this one off, and it's still reusable, so I'm going to use that. I've taken the new fitting off of this one because I'm just going to use the old one, but that one clearly was not ever going to come off. Cases like this, you just have to use some sort of penetrant like PDB Blaster, and if that doesn't work, then you better have a plan B, which I did. So you see that I cut off this particular bespoke line. Like, there's nothing you can do with this. This is using like a hard fuel line going into like a brake fitting into some very bespoke Audi only type fitting that goes into a nylon hose. You can't use this kind of system unless you save the original fitting. Like, there's no way to work around this. So I used a pipe cutter to cut it off. I did have to sand down the kind of shoulder here so I could fit the compression fitting on it. I did smear a little bit of Permatex number 2 just to ensure that it gets a good seal on there. And I snugged those fittings up, and we should have a leak-free seal at that part. So now we can just fit a hose right up to that, right up to this. Now I will have to transfer over this rubber bushing onto the new accumulator. All right, now it's time to see if it holds. Alright, with the car off, it looks like it is holding pressure just fine, at least no leaks. I'm going to start it up and see if it starts right up. So the car starts immediately back up. So I'd say that was the problem, and we don't have any leaks. So we're gonna call that job done. Well, unfortunately, the fuel system situation has escalated, and there was a very thin layer of metal still remaining on the bottom of this tank, and a little bit of pressure caused a crack to develop, and now it is kind of just pouring out its contents now. Great! I was really hoping not to have to replace a gas tank, and I still think I can not have to do that, but I will have to repair that obvious crack now. So when I started this project, I said there's no rust, but clearly that's not true on the ungalvanized bits of this car. So this is how projects turn into projects. You think you have a good idea of what the scope of work is, and then you start working on it, and it takes on a new life of its own. Only thing I can do at this point is wait for this to drain completely and then figure out how to patch it. And now for round 2 of going back to the drawing board, I have received the correct parking brake cables now. You can see these look much closer to the ones that are in the car now. Much more substantial. They have the right rubber grommets, they have the right end fittings. So I don't know how I ended up with the wrong parts originally. I guess I did not search deep enough, but regardless, I'm just happy that these were even available. So let's get these into the car. Look how nicely these new cables operate. That is so much better. All right, the parking brake cables are installed, everything's lubricated, and the brakes are holding. Job done. All right, so that is repaired, I think. It's not the prettiest looking thing in the world, but it's much better than having to buy a whole new tank and figuring out how to drop the whole rear end just to install it. So now it's time to fill this up with some gas and see if it holds. All right, so I did have to go and put another patch on it. So I have two patches on here, but this should be pretty sturdy now. I really like this patch panel kit that I got, and it uses this fast setting epoxy with fiberglass cloth, and it actually sets up real fast and works awesome. But so two patches on there. I filled this up with about 5 gallons of gas, so if it was going to leak, it'd be leaking right now, and it is not. So I think I fixed it. Alright, so that is the emergency brake cables replaced and the fuel accumulator replaced, and the gas tank has stopped leaking. However, nothing has really improved. It turns out the engine doesn't actually start right up if it sits for more than a couple minutes. It goes right back to cranking and fully priming the whole fuel system before it will start up. So clearly there's another fuel system issue. I'm gonna have to figure out where the pressure loss is happening. Could be the injectors, could be the fuel distributor, could be the fuel pump, although I don't think so. So it's just a matter of going in and figuring that out. Now the e-brake cables do operate, and it kind of holds the car in place, but unfortunately my driveway is steep enough to where I still need to put it in first gear, and with the help of the emergency brake cables, the car at least stays stationary in my driveway. But I have a feeling it has something to do with the rear brake calipers and something about the self-ratcheting mechanism inside of the caliper pistons themselves is maybe seized and not getting a full pull on the parking brake. So I will likely have to get into that as well and make those work even better. But that'll be for a later video. In the next video, we will take on replacing the timing belt, replacing the water pump, and making sure there's coolant in the system, because that is probably the next critical thing, making sure the engine doesn't prematurely kill itself. So until that happens, we'll see you all again next time.